Welcome to Porch Play Chat, sponsored by the American Association for Promoting the Child's Right to Play, or more affectionately titled IPA USA. IPA USA is the USA affiliate of the International Play Association. And as part of our efforts to promote play, we've introduced Porch Play Chats, which are now going into podcasts, just FYI. So be watching. And Porch Play Chats are just conversations with people who are just as passionate about play as we are. You can find all over 180 Porch Play Chats on our website at ipausa.org. Up in that top right-hand corner, subscribe to our YouTube channel, be a friend on our Facebook page, follow us on Instagram, and magically, every Monday, a new Porch Play Chat will appear in your feed. I'm Deb Lawrence, and I'm president of IPA USA. And with me on the porch is Stephanie Goloway.
Deb, nice to see you.
Stephanie's a lifelong educator and advocate for play, storytelling, and imagination. She's taught preschool, elementary school, and special education, as well as been a children's librarian and professional storyteller. She's now Professor Emerita of Education at the Community College of Allegheny County in Pittsburgh. Stephanie's the author of Happily Ever Resilient. And if you haven't gotten it yet, you need to get it. Using Fairy Tales to Nurture Children. Um, and I love it. It's Readly Press is where you can get it. And she also has a weekly newsletter, Imagination on the Move. So today, Stephanie's going to talk to us about fairy tales are important for all children, but especially for those who are experiencing toxic stress or trauma. And, you know, this is one of my big loves, is to get people to understand this. But why is that so important? I think that's the big piece that people may go, really? I don't know about that. So,
okay. Well, I thanks, Deb. And I think, as you know, and maybe other people know, I'm not sure. My why for getting into my research on resilience was personal experiences with family substance use disorders. And I went into it thinking as a teacher, I had never had any professional development on what the impact of living with someone who had a substance use disorder, alcoholism or addiction, was on kids. And as an adult, I was feeling it, and I thought, wow, what's it doing to kids? And why, as a teacher, have I never had any professional development on this? And that led me into this down the path through the very deep, dark woods. As a fairy tale person, I have to use that metaphor. And I learned a lot about trauma and toxic stress, and how certainly living with substance use disorders is one form of adverse childhood experiences that have been identified, lots of other ones. But instead of getting lost in those deep, dark woods, I discovered that the magic beans are actually resilience. And fell head first into the research on resilience. And when I thought about what would we do for children that promotes and nurtures resilience, I decided to look into fairy tales as always my favorite form of children's literature. We know that play builds resilience. And I thought, well, play, story, fairy tales, how does this all tie together? And what I encountered, or have continued to encounter, as I learn more about, so my research on fairy tales says, okay, fairy tales as a form of literature, traditional form of literature, actually are ideal, like almost treasure maps to the 5 protective factors that have been identified by Dr. Ann Maston and Harvard Center on the Developing Child as the 5 kinds of experiences that we need to develop resilience. And they're all in fairy tales. So that's why I say every child needs fairy tales, because they are, we can offer children these experiences in many ways, including through rich play and open-ended experiences and opportunities to follow their own ideas, and especially, of course, relationships. But we know that kids' play stems from, the ideas don't just like pop out of nowhere, even though they seem to. Children get ideas for their play through the stories that they encounter, whether they're the day-to-day stories in their own homes, or whether they're stories that they see on TV or in videos, or or books, however they get their stories. Mm-hmm. And I think that you and I've talked before about how a lot of children's literature today is just kind of like it's white bread. It's not there's no substance to it. It's everybody's happy, everything's fine. It's just great. And
which makes them all feel like there's something wrong with them, because there is no controversy or no adversity. And so they feel like they're different when we read all the happy stories and we don't talk about some things that may not be happy that maybe children are experiencing every day. And so, I think that is the big piece about why Happily Ever Resilient is so important, not only for the 5 things that are necessary in building resilience, but in getting people to go back. I mean, I read every fairy tale my entire life, and I turned out okay. I wasn't traumatized by what was happening in the fairy tale, right? And so I think people have become so fearful. Oh, that's too scary. Oh, and you don't think what they may be experiencing at home is scary? And so, sometimes, or in their neighborhood is scary, or on the bus coming to school is scary. Oh, come on, people. Let's it's like we're continuing to wrap them in cotton and bubble wrap without recognizing how that's, number one, not making them feel like they're normal if their experiences aren't the happy stuff every day. Oh, so that's what's so powerful about your book. That's what I appreciate about, and you give them strategies on what to do. That's the beauty of your book to me.
I mean, that's what I continue to want to do for people is help them connect the dots. Because I certainly have heard from many people, friends, people when I've done presentations, like, oh no, we can't, that's too scary. We're recording this in October, so I'm kind of doing a deep dive into Hansel and Gretel for my newsletter, and I'm having so much fun. But I think, that's a great example. I think last time we spoke, I told you about a college student I had who wanted to do Hansel and Gretel as a fairy tale project. And then she got, as an adult, and she was an older adult in her 50s, and she got books out of the library to do this project and was horrified because what does Hansel and Gretel, if you take it as a literal story, what does it have? It's got child abandonment by parents. It's got cannibalism. It's got children lost and can't find their way. It's got come on, Gretel pushes the witch into the oven. It's got murder. It's got all of the bad stuff. And from our adult perspective, why would we want to expose children to any of that? And the more I've been playing with the story, I think, so I've read a bunch of different picture books versions of Hansel and Gretel because I'm interested in it right now. And what is most fascinating to me, besides the story, and we can talk about that more in a few minutes, is that almost every author who writes an author note about why they chose this story to retell or to illustrate says, this was my favorite fairy tale as a child. And there's something there. It's actually a story that there are versions of it that have been told all over the world, very different ones, including Africa and South America, really, really different stories, including among indigenous people. But if you just take the European version, it's in every European country, with variations. And like, so what is it? I was thinking about it from an adult perspective. We see all of like the bad things that adults do. But from a child's perspective, they see these two kids who are in deep doo-doo, and they get out. And
yeah,
they
key.
figure it out.
They figure it out. They don't go hide in the woods under a tree. And
no, they work together. They come up with great ideas. They come back, and they're the heroes. And I think that's the message of fairy tales that all kids need, but especially kids who are going through rough times themselves, is they need to see that, who are the fairy tale heroes? They're the weak. They're the disenfranchised. It's the youngest child. They're like poor. They're like all of the, like powerless. And yet these powerless characters end up saving the day, saving themselves, first of all, and often saving the day and saving other people. And what a great message to give kids hope. And what a great idea to help them nurture their stories that they're going to play themselves.
Well, and just think how empowered seeing what other children were able to do can empower them to try something too. Right. So this is, I think, the whole, I'm so glad you brought up the college student again, because I do think that we think, oh my God, we couldn't possibly, I mean, even Cinderella and Snow White, I mean, the Wicked Witch and Poisoned Apple and the 12 dwarf things that were in the story, and why did all those dwarf people, you go into today from an adult's view and you go, well, why were all those 12 men dwarves interested in helping Snow White? It's just like, no, you're not getting the point of the story. You're going off of, based on what you think they might have been thinking. Don't just enjoy the story. Jack and the Beanstalk.
All of them. I mean,
I love Jack and the Beanstalk. I loved that one. And we have cats in our house, and they, when they're playing, they sound like herds of elephants, but every now and then I'll go fee fi fo so loud. And that comes from the story and the magic beans, and oh my goodness, so beautiful.
I think that, that's a whole nother piece that's kind of outside what we're talking about today, but I think it's important to acknowledge, and that you just brought up a great example, is that so much of fairy tale imagery, whether it's the fee fi fo fum or like, ooh, nibble nibble like a mouse, who's been nibbling at my house, and like the whole idea of a gingerbread house, which actually most of the original stories didn't have gingerbread, but that's okay. But there's the glass slipper, all of those images are very dominant in American culture today. And and so whether you're listening to another kind of story, or you are watching TV and seeing a commercial, or you're hearing references, you're reading about references in books, this is part of our cultural heritage. And cultural affirmation is actually one of the 5 protective factors for resilience.
And there you go.
And we're giving, like, to deprive kids of those references. And they're not references just because they've been used for a long time. They're references because they strike something really deep in us about hope and resilience, and that the world, there's, whether you call it magic or whether you call it, like good juju or whatever you want to call it, there is good stuff going on in the world in addition to the bad. And you have to channel that good stuff before you can overcome the bad and before you can spring back from adversity. Fairy tales, people have always said to me, oh, you like fairy tales, ha ha ha, happily ever after, and I was like, yeah, you know what, before you get there, you have to overcome the witch or the giant or the dragon. Like, have you read any fairy tales? Because you don't get to that happy ever after before you go through some heavy duty stuff.
Right.
And use your own intelligence and your wits, and you collaborate and you reach out to other people, and all of those things that we know to be true as far as being successful in life. It's all there in these fairy tales, because how did people, most of them have been around since way before we had any kind of formal school. And most people got their information, it was either through family life and learning how to do the next best thing that you were supposed to do to stay alive, or through the stories that were told. And so that's why I say that they're really roadmaps to resilience, because they show us the way, show kids the way. So, I mean, if you think, anyway.
No, I know, I love it, because one of the things I think people might be interested in is, what are those 5 elements of resilience? And then let's, just like you did with Hansel and Gretel, what did they have to do to survive that wicked witch that was in the woods trying to eat them, right? So do you have those off the top of your head?
Oh yeah. So no. I just wrote a book about it, and I write about
but that wouldn't help me. I'd write a book, but then I'm old, so I'd forget.
That's why I do the weekly newsletter, so I keep them in my mind every single time. Okay, so the 5 protective factors, nurturing experiences, whatever you want to call them, for resilience are: 1, relationships. Duh, we all know that's the foundation of our field of play, of life. 2 is initiative, and it includes things like agency and problem solving and ability to take some risks. 3 is executive functions. Probably nobody who wrote fairy tales or told fairy tales knew that word, but it's our prefrontal cortex. It includes cognitive flexibility, seeing outside the box, being able to see possibilities, working memory, being able to keep track of what you're doing one step at a time, and inhibitory control, which is tied into self-regulation, but it's more like if you're feeling this fear and trepidation about doing something, inhibitory control is like, yeah, but you can really do it. And so you go forward and you do it. So it's like self-regulation, but a little different. But self-regulation is number 4. And it is your ability to control your body, your emotions, to some extent, your thinking. And then you come into the cultural affirmation is number 5, like feeling like you're part of something bigger than just yourself, whether it's family, community, culture at large. I mean, I always think of Bronfenbrenner's circles when I think of all of this stuff.
Ecological system theory.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like it's yep. It all ties in. And how do we get affirmed culturally? I mean, stories are a huge part of it, but it's also food and music, and faith is a big part of it. People who are connected to some kind of a faith-based tradition, any of those kinds of things can provide that cultural affirmation. So there are those 5. And you want to go through Hansel and Gretel real quick and
let's do it.
Okay. All right. So number 1, relationships. It's all about relationships, and we know that. All right. So there are numbers of relationships in Hansel and Gretel. First of all, there's the relationship between the parents, sometimes stepmother and father, sometimes mother and father, depending on what version you are, and the kids. And that's a fraught relationship. Right. I mean, the parents make the decision. Usually it's the mother who says, they don't have food. Let's leave the kids in the woods. That way we'll be, at least 2 of us will survive instead of all 4 of us dying of starvation. All right. So that's a little challenging situation for children to deal with. And so the parents then end up abandoning the kids in the woods. And when I think of that, I think of all children have experienced abandonment. I mean, I think I was a pretty attached and good mom, but for years, my daughter remembered the one time that I did not pick her up on time from dance. And I didn't because I ran out of gas. It was a snowy day. I was on a road. This was before cell phones. I had to walk 1.5 miles home, get her dad to like help me get back into town. So I was late. And for probably 10 or 15 years, she was like, you remember that time you didn't pick me up at dance? I'm always afraid now that you're not going to pick me up. And I'm like, I remember that.
One time.
But I think the point is that kids do feel, I mean, whether they're being dropped off at childcare or whether and they're not sure they want to be there. I mean, that sense of abandonment, even if it's minor, is not something that I mean, a lot of kids can identify with even that. So there's that relationship. It's fraught, but it's not something that isn't understandable. And the fact that they come out at the end and it all turns out happy is a great affirmation that, okay, you might be left in the woods, but you might have been left at dance, but I'll pick you up eventually. Don't worry. But the big relationship, obviously, in Hansel and Gretel is the relationship between the two siblings. So they are in bed listening to their parents talk. One, they're being very self-regulated. Okay. That's not till number 4, but we'll throw that in because they're laying in bed and being as quiet as they can be. And they overhear this conversation between the parents about leaving them in the woods. And immediately Gretel's it was younger, I guess, and she's scared, and Hansel said, don't worry, I'm gonna figure it out. And throughout the whole story, the two of them kind of tag team. Like sometimes it's Hansel, initially it's Hansel, he sneaks out, he picks up the little white stones and he leaves them as a path. And so he's kind of the dominant, the problem solver. He takes that initiative, another protective factor. And then it kind of pivots once he's stuck in a cage because he's bigger and the witch wants to eat him. It's Gretel who hands him a chicken bone and says, stick the chicken bone out when she tries to feel your finger. And it's Gretel who figures out how to get the witch into the oven as she's getting ready to cook Hansel. So the two of them, the whole story, they go back and forth between one helping the other. It's not always one help. And I think that is such a powerful message that, yeah, your peers, whether they're your siblings or whether they're your friends, they can have your back and you can have their back. And that reciprocity in this particular story, I think, is really affirming for all kids, and especially kids who sometimes, if they're going through really adverse experiences at home, their siblings may be the people that they can
have their back. Well, and I think the other thing about just that one piece I want to talk about for a second is it's not always the guy who's solving all the problems, right?
Right.
So that empowers girls who are listening to the story. Oh, look, she was able to problem solve, and she had some power and she was protective. All of those things are wonderful too.
I mean, she's the one who shoves the witch in the oven. Let's just be.
She's the hero.
I'll just leave it there. Is that we talk about empowered women and how fairy tales aren't about empowered women. Well, obviously we haven't looked at Hansel and Gretel. Then there's the witch, and although we might think of Ann Maston talks about relationships with caregivers, relationships with other competent adults, and relationships with peers, as all 3 of these are really important for resilience. And the witch might not seem like another competent adult, but when you get right down to it, before she decides she's going to eat the kids, they're lost in the woods, and she invites them in. She gives them food. She gives them a soft place to eat. And okay, maybe from an adult point of view is like, oh, you don't want to, don't take candy from strangers. I'm pretty sure that's
where it came from. Yeah.
From there. But like in many fairy tales, sometimes these magical helpers are not all good or all bad. Often the human characters are all good or all bad. But in this, there's some ambivalence there because she does initially like help kids. And so there's there's that. Maybe a subtext is
A little
like
bit. Yeah.
a
Okay.
little bit.
Did she
All right.
have an intention about doing that? Okay. But okay, I get it.
Okay.
She was going to eat them.
She was going to eat them.
Yeah, she was. But
Break
okay.
apart her house. And like some of the more modern versions, I'm like not sure what I'm going to do with them.
We'll give her that. We'll just give her. She was nice. She brought him in. She gave him food. Okay, we'll leave it there.
Okay. So then the next protective factor is initiative. And again, that's your problem solving, your agency. And we already touched on that a little bit because they do save themselves, but it's not just like poof, magically they save themselves. Right. Hansel sneaks out. He gets these white stones. He puts them down. Then they find their way home the first time. Then they know that they're going to get left in the woods again. And this time the stepmother has locked the door so he can't get out. And instead of going like, oh, okay, we're doomed all over, he takes the he takes the bread that they've been given and he breaks it apart and leaves a little trail of breadcrumbs. So, good problem solving. One possibility gone. Here's number two. Doesn't work out too well because the birds eat the breadcrumbs, but not his fault. It
was a great idea. It just didn't work out.
Just
sometimes great ideas don't work out. So again,
which is true. Sometimes they don't, but he had it. Then you get into they're hungry. They really want. I mean, they haven't eaten anything. They go into they start breaking off pieces of the house. It's a lot of story of the versions are like it's a bread house. It's not all candy. And so they feed themselves. Not great on the self-regulation part, but because why go up to somebody's house and break it? But initiative, we're hungry, let's eat. Yeah. And then there's the whole sequence once the witch has made clear her intentions, that they give Hansel she wants to pull his finger to see if he's growing plumper, the bone. And Gretel, the sequence before she just shoves the witch into the oven, the witch is trying to get her to go in and check the bread that they're baking. And Gretel figures it out that it's not a good idea, and she tells the witch, "Oh, I can't do it. It's so deep and dark in there. Can you show me how to do it?" And the witch does it, and then Gretel shuts her in the oven and saves the day. I mean, these are great ideas. Then they take even more initiative, and they discover she unlocks the cage. Hansel's free, and they discover that the witch has all these piles of jewels just randomly lying around. And so they pick up the jewels and take them home and make sure that nobody is ever in their family is hungry.
Is hungry again.
Yes. Like wonderful, like great ideas, problem solving, and agency. Like they never give up. Neither one of them ever gives up. And I think what a message for kids who are feeling overwhelmed with the stressors of their lives is, hey, you know what? They did it. Maybe I can too. Executive functions. Or do you want to say something more about? I'm sorry.
No, I love it. So, I mean, it's really helping people understand the value of this story for children.
Executive functions. And all of these protective factors kind of overlap, but executive functions, if you start with cognitive flexibility, I mean, again, can't get out to get the little white rocks that led them home in the moonlight. Okay, white bread. I have bread in my hand. I'll try something else. Gretel, like thinking what happens often when kids or adults are experiencing great stress is our executive functions kind of shut down. So you would think, here's Gretel, like her brother's about to be baked and roasted, and she's being asked to get into the oven with baking bread. And many of us our executive functions would just shut right down, and we would go
fear. Yes, fear would do it.
She doesn't. She figures out what she's going to do with the witch to trick her. And often in fairy tales, you'll see these like really, subtle, not subtle, but you don't hear the good fairy tales. You don't hear all of the thinking that goes behind it. It's just the words that come out, and you see this is how she's come up with an alternative solution to the problem and figures out that problem solving. Then the working memory. I mean, for Hansel to keep in his head, all right, I'm going to stop every so often and drop a rock as I'm being led into the forest with my
to
parents.
Be abandoned.
Be abandoned and like
be abandoned.
Eaten by wild animals. Like he keeps it together, and he also.
Oh, I think I lost her. Hold on. I'm going to pause the recording for just a second. Okay, where were we?
Okay,
we were on self-regulation.
We were on self-regulation. Self-regulation, the kids show it all through the whole thing. There is some crying and whining when they like are abandoned in the woods, but
they are children.
They are children, and they basically, I mean, they are able to go back to sleep. They're listening carefully to their parents. Then they go back to sleep. Then they stay together. They comfort each other even though they're scared. Gretel never lets on. Hansel apparently never like squeals at the witch, and when she's trying to fatten him up, Gretel keeps her act together. She never lets on that she's not the perfect little girl worker bee that's going to help the witch do whatever it is. She doesn't let on that she's scared. And after they get the jewels, and are headed home, in a lot of versions, there's like they come to a river that they can't cross, and instead of freaking out, one of them spots a goose across the river, or a swan, or a duck, and they said, okay, the duck or the swan can carry us across. And I think often it's Gretel who says, well, she'll have to do it one at a time, because we'll be too heavy to carry for both of us for her to carry. And again, good self-regulation, like, impulsively they would both jump on the back of this swan and think that they'd go, but they were like, no, wait, we need to do this carefully. So there's self-regulation through the whole thing either. And as for cultural affirmation, I mean, we all know Hansel and Gretel. Even the people who think it's a scary, scary story remember it. And I think for kids going through adversity, like a lot of fairy tales, as you said in the beginning, feeling as though they're not alone, that they're not the only ones that are going through rough times, is part of a cultural affirmation for kids. Because often we know kids think, how do you know what anybody else is going on in anybody else's house? We don't.
Right. You don't.
You don't.
Well, and I think it just goes back to, and that was wonderful. Thank you. Because it really breaks down, and every fairy tale offers you that. But I think it goes back to when we try to protect them and don't talk about things that are uncomfortable for us, we isolate children because they think they're different.
Yes.
And I really think that is the piece where we're really harming more than reading a fairy tale. I mean, come on, people. And you remember Jack Be Nimble, Jack Be Quick, Jack, all those nursery rhymes and all of those fairy tales provide such rich vocabulary and context and memory. It helps with memory. Why aren't we doing them? And I think that's the challenge that we need to ask. We need to take on. Maybe I'm going to start. And my favorite, when I was working with children and a preschool teacher, someone would talk about their parents had read them a fairy tale, and the three little pigs, and then the three little pigs from the wolf's perspective, and all of those different Red Riding Hood, and from everybody's perspective. It's all of those, I think, really help children see how differences of opinion can be held. And it's important to see that too. So, and especially with all the different versions of each of these fairy tales, that's the other thing that I love, because I would say, oh, when we read this story by somebody different, how's this book different than the one that we read? And they would list for me tons of, I mean, just think of the value that those stories, those fairy tales give us. So, oh my goodness. So again, we have to have you back. But that's, I think the challenge for us is to not think the stories are scary and see the benefits of the stories.
And I think, I mean, I don't think there's any question that fairy tales, because they came from the oral tradition, they show kids story structure. They help kids internalize story structure so that they can become better readers and writers.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question about that. I think, as you say, and I think resilience is one way we can say, okay, are they scary or are they resilience producing? And I
Yeah.
think that to me, that's kind of something that I hope educators all start to think of, because if they have these stories, they're going to start playing these stories, and then they're going to take it to a whole nother level.
Oh,
And
yeah. Oh, and just think about what that does for them. So they can even create their own story out of the scenarios that
right.
you read to them. Oh my goodness. It's just it's 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 such a rich literacy and language experience that has nothing to do with children writing their letters, right? So,
Correct.
and retelling. Oh my goodness. So please consider. Please, 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 please. All right. Don't go anywhere while I close this out. To learn more about IPA USA, please visit our website at ipausa.org. And until next time, keep on playing.